Is there any pain greater than holding over $800 million in your hands, yet facing a final chapter soaked in tears? Céline Dion, the woman who once made the whole world hold its breath with a single crystalline note, sang the power of love as if it were a living force capable of mending every fracture in the human soul. Like love itself could heal all wounds, she gave the world, "My heart will go on." And in that haunting, eternal melody, hearts everywhere shattered in unison with hers. Millions of strangers connected in a shared ache, a collective exhale of sorrow and hope. But behind every thunderous ovation that shook the rafters of the grandest arenas was a silence no one heard, a private void echoing in the chambers of her heart. Behind every sparkling gown that caught the light like a constellation sewn into fabric, a body trembled through the invisible grip of illness. Behind the roar of applause that seemed to lift her into the heavens, a woman sang through unimaginable grief, her voice a fragile bridge between public triumph and personal devastation. Her voice carried the weight of love lost, dreams postponed, and a private pain masked by public perfection. A pain that no amount of fame could anesthetize, no fortune could silence. It was the kind of pain that lived in the spaces between notes, in the breath before the crescendo, in the moment after the final chord faded and the lights dimmed. And now, as the world looks upon the empire she built, the fortune she leaves behind is nothing short of staggering. Estimated at $800 million, a number so vast it seems to belong to myth rather than mortality. It is a testament not just to her voice, that once-in-a-generation instrument of divine clarity, but to her unrelenting spirit, a force that refused to bend even when the world tried to break her. More than 250 million records sold worldwide, each one a testament to a voice that transcended language, culture, and time. Las Vegas residencies that didn't just break records. They redefined the very concept of entertainment history, turning the desert city into a pilgrimage site for the brokenhearted and the dreamers alike. A perfume empire that bottled her essence, elegance, resilience, mystery, and sold it to millions who wanted to carry a piece of her with them. Fashion ventures that turned her into a style icon, her silhouette as recognizable as her vibrato. Real estate that spans the map like chapters in a dream. A $72 million Bahamian-inspired estate in Jupiter Island, Florida, where turquoise waters lapped at private shores and palm trees whispered secrets to the wind. A French chateau on a private island in Quebec, valued at $25.5 million. A stone sanctuary wrapped in mist and memory, where the St. Lawrence River flowed like a lullaby, and a serene mansion in Nevada, now worth $4.5 million, where her children's laughter still echoes through golden corridors, a sound more precious than any platinum album. Her garage holds a Maybach 62, a Mercedes-Benz S350, and a Cadillac Escalade, each vehicle a silent witness to moments of triumph and heartbreak, to red carpet arrivals and tear-streaked departures, to the quiet drives home after shows where the adrenaline faded and the weight of loss settled in. Her jet, a $42 million Bombardier Global Express, wasn't just for luxury, though it gleamed with opulence. It was her way of being everywhere and nowhere, escaping grief while chasing duty, crossing oceans and hours to be with family, to perform, to survive. It was her cocoon in the sky, where she could cry without being seen, where she could rehearse in silence, where she could hold her children close above the clouds. But this story isn't about wealth. It's about the weight that comes with it, because every dollar in that fortune carries the imprint of a sacrifice. A show performed after losing the love of her life, when her heart was still bleeding but the stage demanded perfection. A tour continued with failing health, when her body screamed for rest but her spirit refused to surrender. A voice pushed to its limit while her muscles spasmed and her soul begged for mercy. What she built is more than an empire. It's a monument to resilience, forged in the fire of endurance, tempered by loss, and polished by love. Yet what she gave up can never be priced. Not in dollars, not in awards, not in standing ovations. It was her childhood, her health, her privacy, her peace. It was the softness of youth traded for the steel of survival. And now, as her family stands quietly before the legacy she's leaving behind, they don't see assets. They don't see properties or planes or perfume bottles. They see the woman behind them, A mother who gave them everything, who sang them to sleep with the same voice that moved nations. A wife who loved beyond reason, beyond age, beyond judgment. An artist who bled into every note, who turned her pain into poetry and her grief into grace. If her music has ever walked with you through heartbreak, if, because you loved me, carried you through a dark night, if the power of love reminded you that you were not alone, consider leaving a tribute below. Even a single like is a whisper of gratitude for the voice that carried us when we couldn't carry ourselves. A quiet acknowledgement that her light still burns in the hearts she touched. How devastating it is to enter the world wrapped in music, yet starved of everything else. Céline Marie Claudette Dion was born on March 30, 1968, in the small, working-class town of Charlemagne, Quebec. A place where dreams were as rare as warmth in winter, where the snow fell heavy and the hope fell heavier. She was the youngest of 14 children, the last note in a symphony of survival, a family overflowing with song but empty of means. Her parents, Edhimer and Therese Dion, were musicians, not the kind who played in grand halls, but the kind who played for love, for escape, for the sheer necessity of beauty in a life of scarcity. The house was filled with harmony, yes, but it was the kind that echoed off bare walls and empty cupboards, the kind that tried to fill the silence of hunger with melody. There was not enough food, not enough space, not enough warmth. The children slept 3 to a bed, their breath mingling in the cold. Meals were stretched thin, bread sliced into thirds, soup watered down until it barely remembered its flavor. And yet, in that cramped, creaking house, music was the one thing they had in abundance. It was their inheritance, their rebellion, their prayer. Celine's first crib wasn't a crib at all. It was a drawer pulled from a wooden cabinet, lined with whatever blankets could be spared, and placed beside her parents' bed. It cradled a baby who would one day move millions with her voice, but at that moment had nothing but melody to cling to. No silver spoon, no soft toys, no promises of tomorrow. Just the faint hum of her mother's voice, the distant strum of a guitar, the rhythm of 13 siblings breathing in the dark. Her lullabies weren't sung to her. They were overheard, notes drifting from her siblings' late-night rehearsals when the cold crept through the floorboards and the world outside was asleep. From the very first breath, Celine's life wasn't about comfort. It was about endurance. It was about learning to hold a note longer than hunger, to harmonize with hardship, to find warmth in sound when there was none in the walls. And through that endurance, something rare and staggering was born. Not just talent, but a spirit forged in the crucible of want. A voice that would one day rise from the ashes of poverty like a phoenix made of light. By the age of 5, she sang at her brother's wedding. Not as a novelty act, not as a cute child with a big voice, but because her voice had already started to break through the noise of poverty, to demand attention, to refuse to be ignored. She didn't sing for fun. She sang like it was her lifeline, like every note was a rope pulling her family out of the dark. By 12, she was writing songs with her mother, Therese, and recording demos with her brother, Michel. Crude tapes made on borrowed equipment, mailed with trembling hands to anyone who might listen. They recorded one tape, just one, and sent it to a man named René Angélil, a music producer in Montreal who had managed stars but had never heard anything like this. When he pressed play, the room went still. He didn't hear a child. He heard an angel. He heard a voice so pure, so powerful, it cracked something open inside him. And he wept, not polite tears, but the kind that come from recognizing destiny. He said it was the voice of an angel. And then he did something no one expected, something that would change the course of 2 lives forever. He mortgaged his house, his only home, to fund her first album. That was not business. That was belief. That was a sacred gamble on a fragile girl with crooked teeth, shy eyes, and a voice that didn't fit inside her tiny frame. A voice too large for her body, too vast for her circumstances. She didn't have stylists or makeup artists. There was no spotlight, no red carpet, just raw talent wrapped in bone-thin resilience, dressed in hand-me-downs and hope. And how cruel, how impossibly cruel, that such beauty had to be born from such scarcity. While other girls her age were playing with dolls, trading secrets at sleepovers, dreaming of prom dresses, Céline was standing in front of cracked mirrors, practicing her French vowels with precision, training her tone until it gleamed like polished glass. While others went to school dances, giggling under paper streamers, she was in freezing studios, warming her voice with nothing but hope and hot tea, her breath visible in the air. She learned to pronounce English phonetically long before she understood it, mimicking every syllable like her life depended on it, because it did. She studied diction, breath control, emotional range at an age when most children still struggled to tie their shoes, still believed in Santa Claus, still thought the world was kind. She gave up sleep. She gave up school events. She gave up softness, play, innocence, so she could build a dream out of steel, a future strong enough to lift an entire family. Her first song, La Voix du Bon Dieu, It Was Only a Dream, became a hit in Quebec, a beacon of light in the French-Canadian music scene. In 1982, at just 14, she stepped onto a stage in Tokyo at the Yamaha World Popular Song Festival and sang in front of 115 million television viewers. A girl from the forgotten corners of French Canada, now broadcast to the world. That night, she became an international star. But behind that performance, behind every glittering note, was sacrifice. The world saw her gowns, her grace, her voice, but not the birthdays she missed. Not the childhood that vanished somewhere between airport gates and rehearsal rooms. Not the friends she never made because every moment was dedicated to the craft. In her memoir, My Story, My Dream, published years later, she wrote with aching honesty, I never had a teenage life. I don't remember prom. I don't remember sleepovers or first kisses or careless summers. I remember microphones and costumes and waking up at 5 a.m. for soundcheck, my voice raw, my body tired, my heart full of duty. The spotlight looked golden, but it burned. And still she walked straight into it, eyes wide open, because behind her, waiting in silence, was a family whose hopes rested entirely on her fragile shoulders. She didn't just carry her dream, she carried theirs. The weight of 14 mouths that once ate slices of bread cut in thirds. The debt René had staked his life on. The belief that if her voice could rise high enough, they might never be cold again. That was the real pressure, not fame, not awards, but survival. The knowledge that if she failed, they all fell. And yet, even under all that weight, she soared. Her voice became the heartbeat of generations, a pulse that synced with the world's joy and sorrow. But that ascent, so brilliant, so unshakable, began not with applause, not with Titanic, not in the palaces of Las Vegas, but in a cramped room in Charlemagne where a little girl sang just loud enough to drown out her own hunger. A child who didn't know luxury, didn't know vanity, only music and the ache to be heard. She sang into spoons that became microphones, into mirrors that became audiences, into the dark where dreams were born. In later interviews, decades removed from that drawer crib, Céline would recall those early years not with bitterness, but with a kind of aching reverence, a holy gratitude. I would sleep in a drawer again if it meant I could still sing. And that is the kind of spirit that cannot be trained, only born. A spirit that turns scarcity into strength, silence into symphony. The girl who was cradled in a drawer didn't rise alone. Destiny had already chosen her protector, her guide, her love. René Angélil didn't just manage her career. He became her anchor, her great love, her shield against a world that would demand more and more of her until there was almost nothing left to give. He believed in her before she ever believed in herself, saw the star before she saw the light. And that belief lit a fire that never went out. A fire that turned into albums, into sold-out tours, into Grammys and Oscars, into a legacy that would outlive them both. But all of it, every accolade, every dollar, was built on a foundation of silent sacrifices and invisible wounds. Wounds she carried with grace, wounds the world never saw. And that's what makes her story so unbearably powerful. Not that she won, but how much of herself she gave away so others could believe in miracles. Her voice was never just a sound. It was a bridge. From poverty to power, from silence to global symphonies, from a drawer to the world stage. And as the years go by, people will remember the anthems, the awards, the standing ovations. But what they must never forget is the little girl who started it all. Not with riches, not with connections, but with a hunger so loud the world couldn't help but listen. A hunger that became a voice that became a legacy that became a light. But sometimes, even in the harshest winters of childhood, life plants a quiet miracle. One person, one moment that changes the course of everything. For Céline, that miracle arrived disguised as a demo tape, a mortgage, and a man who saw eternity in a 12-year-old's voice. She first met him when she was just 12 years old. A shy, delicate girl with a voice too big for her frame, eyes that hadn't yet learned to dream too far, hands that trembled when she held a microphone. He was a man of experience, 26 years her senior, a respected figure in the music industry who had seen talent come and go, but never like this. His name was René Angélil, and when he pressed play on her cassette, something inside him broke open. He did not hear polish. He heard purity. He heard a truth so raw it made him cry. Not from sentiment, but from recognition. He heard the future, and he did something few men would ever do. He put his own house on the line, his security, his future, to finance her first album. That act was not business. It was belief. It was not a contract. It was the quiet thunder of destiny unfolding in real time, a covenant written in faith and risk. From that moment on, what they built together was not just a career. It was sanctuary. It was trust forged through fire, tempered by time. He became her protector in a world that was never gentle, a world that would chew up child stars and spit them out. While the world watched a young girl ascend from obscurity to superstardom, René remained in the background, silent, steady, guarding her spirit from the weight of expectation and the glare of fame. When she was tired, he carried her. When she was unsure, he spoke for her. When the lights burned too hot, he stepped in to shade her. He became the steady breath behind every note she sang, the hand that guided her through the storm. And slowly, imperceptibly, that trust turned into tenderness. That tenderness became love. Not the fleeting kind, but the enduring kind, the kind that grows in silence, in shared sacrifices, in the spaces between words. At 19, she poured her heart into a handwritten letter, confessing the feelings she had long tucked away, feelings that had blossomed in the safety of his belief. At 20, that love bloomed quietly, privately, not to deceive the world, but to protect something fragile that the world would never understand. Their bond was not a scandal. It was a shelter, a sacred space where she could be both star and human, both icon and girl. She once said, "He was the only man who made me feel safe enough to be entirely myself." And when she finally revealed the truth to the public, she stood tall against judgment, disbelief, and misunderstanding, not out of rebellion, but because her love was not a phase. It was her compass, her North Star, her reason. In 1994, they were married at the Notre Dame Basilica in Montreal in a ceremony that felt more like a sacred vow than a social event. She walked down the aisle not as a global icon, but as a woman choosing devotion with her whole being. Her gown a cascade of lace and light, her veil a promise. Their marriage was never loud. It was luminous. It was not perfect, but it was profoundly faithful, a partnership of equals in spirit, if not in age. René was not just her husband. He was her manager, her mirror, her emotional anchor, and the father of her children. He was her balance in chaos, her silence in noise, her anchor when life threatened to drift. When she sang about love, she was not interpreting lyrics. She was testifying to patience, to devotion, to a kind of love that deepens with every storm it survives, every trial it endures. Together, they built a life that straddled the divine and the domestic. A world of Grammys and baby bottles, world tours and whispered goodnights, private jets and bedtime stories. He was backstage for every standing ovation, never asking for recognition, only praying that she would shine. And shine she did, but she always knew why. Because behind her voice was his hand. Behind her courage was his faith. She gave him everything, her youth, her loyalty, her career, and never once hesitated. Because to her, love was not in the glamour. It was in the waiting. It was in the quiet hours when no one was watching, in the small gestures that built a life while the world chased headlines. Their love story was not built for tabloids. It was built for eternity, not in bold declarations, but in the soft endurance of day after day, year after year, of choosing each other when no one else saw. In later interviews, she reflected with tears in her eyes. He was my only love. Every part of who I became was shaped by his love and belief in me. And even now, though the spotlight shows only one figure on stage, Céline knows in every corner of her being, she has never stood alone. His presence lingers in every note, every breath, every silence. When she sang, time didn't just stand still. It listened. Céline Dion didn't chase fame with flash or scandal. She built it breath by breath from pain, from hunger, from a place deeper than ambition. Her voice wasn't trained. It was endured. Each note held in perfect pitch was once held in silence, in rehearsal rooms that smelled of sweat and determination, in moments when her throat burned but she refused to stop. While the world overlooked a poor girl from Quebec, in 1990, when she stepped into English-language music with Unison, it wasn't just a new album. It was a risk, a leap across a linguistic and cultural chasm. She was mocked for her accent, doubted by executives, told that French singers didn't belong in American pop, that her name was too hard to pronounce, her story too foreign. But Céline didn't break. She bent her vowels, tightened her tone, and let her voice do what words couldn't. Where Does My Heart Beat Now cracked the US top 5, not because the world was ready, but because Céline forced it to listen. She wasn't supposed to belong, but she made herself impossible to ignore, her voice a battering ram against the gates of doubt. And that was only the beginning. Her voice crossed oceans, broke barriers, melted through language and culture like sunlight through frost. In 1992, her duet with Peabo Bryson on Disney's Beauty and the Beast turned a cartoon into an emotional reckoning, a fairy tale into a prayer. The Oscar didn't matter. What mattered was that children cried, parents paused, lovers held each other a little tighter, strangers in theaters felt seen. That's what Céline always wanted, not fame, but feeling. Not applause, but connection. And then came 1997, when a ship sank again and the world drowned in her voice. My Heart Will Go On wasn't just a song. It was survival. It became the anthem for grief, for memory, for the kind of love that lives on long after breath is gone, after bodies fail, after goodbyes are said. The song earned an Academy Award, a Grammy, and sold over 30 million copies. But behind that trembling vibrato was a woman already beginning to break. Not from fame, but from the weight of carrying the world's emotions while her own went unspoken. What the world didn't see was how heavy success had become. The interviews never asked how lonely it was at the top, how isolating it was to be loved by millions but truly known by so few. The magazines didn't show her collapsing backstage from exhaustion, her body trembling after giving everything to the stage. The cameras captured standing ovations, not the migraines that followed, not the vocal injuries that threatened her gift, not the nights she couldn't sleep because the next day demanded more. More notes, more emotion, more perfection. And still she gave it every single time because to her, the stage was sacred, the audience was family, the song was salvation. In 2003, when she accepted a Las Vegas residency at the Coliseum at Caesar's Palace, critics called it a career graveyard, a retreat for aging stars. But Céline made it sacred. Over 700 shows, over $600 million in ticket sales, over 3 million people sat in her presence and felt seen, felt held, felt healed. Her voice didn't just echo in theaters. It stitched up wounds, said what people couldn't, held strangers who were barely holding on. Her concerts weren't performances. They were confessions, mass, therapy, sanctuary. She didn't just sing. She bled artfully, pouring her soul into every phrase, every gesture, every breath. Even as her voice soared, her world behind the curtain was growing darker. While fans chanted her name, she was fielding whispers of illness, burying pain behind designer gowns and practiced smiles. While awards poured in, Grammys, Junos, Billboard Awards, Something inside her began to wither slowly, quietly, like a rose fading in a locked room, petals falling one by one in the dark. Yet she never stepped away. She walked through the fire in stilettos, face lit by spotlights, heart burning from the inside out, refusing to let the world see her falter. She stood before presidents, Clinton, Obama, world leaders who requested her presence. She opened Olympic ceremonies, her voice a beacon of unity. She shook hands with royalty, her poise unshakable. But none of that rivaled the quiet triumph of singing lullabies to her sons when the world wasn't watching. When the lights were off and the only audience was 3 small hearts beating in the dark. Her empire soared beyond music. Perfumes that sold millions, fashion lines that defined elegance, global tours that broke records. Her net worth crossed $500 million, then kept climbing. But wealth was never her endgame. Her true riches were measured in goosebumps raised on strangers' arms, in tears shed in silence by someone halfway across the world, in letters from fans who survived cancer, suicide, heartbreak because her songs told them they weren't alone. She gave pieces of herself to millions and yet never stopped giving. Her strength wasn't just in her vocals, but in her endurance, the way she rose every morning, no matter how tired, no matter how broken, and chose to sing. She didn't rise by luck. She rose because she refused to sink. Even as the industry changed, trends faded, critics circled like vultures, Céline remained unshaken, immovable. She never needed to reinvent herself. She was already singular, a voice, a spirit, a truth. And still, as she stood in sold-out arenas with pyrotechnics exploding behind her and orchestras swelling beneath her, her mind often wandered to quieter things. To a kitchen floor in Charlemagne where she once danced with a spoon as a microphone, to the drawer that once held her like a cradle, to the cold nights when music was the only warmth. The spotlight may have crowned her a queen, but it was humility, discipline, and relentless purpose that kept her standing. Her voice lifted crowds, but it also held together the cracks in her own spirit, patching the fractures with melody. And even as the ovations thundered, she knew behind every note she delivered, there was a cost no one would ever see, a cost only she could carry. And still she sang. She had lived a life that glittered like legend. Standing ovations in languages she didn't speak, arenas trembling beneath the force of her voice, love letters written in lights from Tokyo to Toronto, Paris to Las Vegas. For years, Céline Dion didn't just sing. She soared. Her voice didn't echo. It imprinted itself on the soul of the world. Her presence didn't perform. It healed. But no matter how far she climbed, no one escapes gravity forever. And when her fall came, it didn't strike her career. It struck her heart. It struck her home. It struck the one soul who had seen her long before the world ever applauded. René Angélil. He was never just a manager, never merely a husband. He was the rhythm behind every silence she broke, the fire behind every trembling note she gave, the hand that steadied her when the world spun too fast. They met when she was 12, barely tall enough to reach the microphone, but already heavy with impossible dreams. And he, a man hardened by life, humbled by failure, but soft enough to weep at the sound of her voice, didn't see a child. He saw a prophecy. He didn't invest in talent. He gave everything to faith, mortgaging his home, his security, his future. He placed it all in the hands of a girl the world hadn't yet learned to spell. What they built from that moment wasn't just a career. It was something holy, too big for charts, too fragile for headlines, too sacred for scrutiny. But love, no matter how profound, is never immune to fate's cruelty. In 2013, the blow came: throat cancer. Merciless, swift, the same disease that once threatened her career now threatening the man who had given her one. The irony was cruel, poetic, unbearable. Céline didn't hesitate. She walked off the stage mid-tour, mid-world, mid-everything, and disappeared into the quiet hell of sterile hospital corridors and ticking machines. The world kept clapping, kept demanding, but she was elsewhere, holding a hand going colder each day, whispering strength into ears that could no longer respond. Her voice, once echoing across stadiums, now cracked in whispered lullabies sung into the hollow ache of fluorescent-lit rooms. There were no costumes, no fans, no encores. Just her and him, and time closing in like a tide she could not stop, could not outsing, could not outlove. She had always leaned on his strength. Now she became his. She became the voice in his silence, the light in his darkness. And even then, every note she whispered was a prayer disguised as melody, a plea to the universe to spare him. But prayer sometimes is not enough. On January 14, 2016, the silence won. René's breath, the same breath that once cheered her from backstage, that once said, "You can do this," with just a look, that once filled her world with certainty, was gone. Just gone. And with it, half her spirit unraveled, thread by thread, until she barely recognized the woman in the mirror. The woman who had once stood unshaken before billions now faced a wound that no audience could see, and no spotlight could soothe. She didn't collapse for the cameras. Her grief was too sacred for headlines, too deep for sound bites. But inside, everything broke. Quietly, completely, irreversibly. Still, she stood for him. She walked into Notre Dame Basilica, the same place they'd once vowed eternity, the same stained glass glowing above. And this time she walked alone. The aisle stretched like a lifetime. The pew beside her screamed with absence. The air itself refused to breathe. Her eyes didn't cry. They hollowed, as if the light had been sucked out. And as she sat beneath the same arches where they had once said forever, she realized she was now the keeper of both halves of that promise, of his dreams, his faith, his love. That day wasn't just the funeral of a man. It was the burial of a chapter of safety, of home, of the life they had built note by note. And since then, every song she sings isn't just melody. It's mourning, it's memory, it's message. Because though the crowd may see her dressed in sequins, rising to high notes no one else dares touch, she sings now through absence. She sings to the silence beside her. She sings into the space where his voice should still be whispering, "You're ready." And maybe the world doesn't notice it, but in every performance there's a chair that remains spiritually occupied, a presence felt but not seen. And in every bow, a small tilt of her head upward as if to say, "Did you hear that, my love?" And somehow, in that invisible corner of every room she fills, he's still there. Not watching to critique, but watching to stay close, to keep his vow to never truly leave. Because love like that doesn't end. It echoes forever, in every note, in every breath, in every silence between. Grief in its most merciless form doesn't knock, crashes. It doesn't wait for healing. It devours what's left. For Céline Dion, the loss of René Angélil wasn't the end of mourning. It was merely the first tremor in an earthquake that would split her heart in two, leaving fault lines that would never fully close. Just as she was beginning to steady herself again, learning how to walk without the man who had carried her dreams, loved her with unwavering devotion, and been her shadow on every stage, the unthinkable happened. 2 days later, on January 16, 2016, another pillar fell. Her beloved brother, Daniel Dion, was gone. Cancer claimed him, too, swift and unforgiving, just like René, as if death itself had a schedule to keep. But it wasn't just death that broke her. It was the cruelty of time. The universe didn't space out its cruelty. It delivered it in a double blow, almost as if daring her soul to shatter completely. Within 48 hours, she lost her life partner and her childhood companion. One was the man who built her future with vision and faith. The other, a piece of her past, a thread woven into the earliest songs of her life. Daniel wasn't just her brother. He was a playmate in poverty, a partner in harmony, a constant through years when their home echoed more with song than with security. They had shared lullabies in the dark, late-night whispers about dreams too big for their small world, quiet hopes that one day the music would save them. And now she was burying them both before the flowers on the first grave had even begun to wilt. There was no time to breathe between funerals, no pause to process, no space to mourn one before the next demanded her presence. Her pain didn't come in waves. It came as a flood, drenching every corner of her being, seeping into her bones, her voice, her sleep. In those impossible days, Céline walked not as a diva, not as an icon, but as a daughter of grief, a sister in sorrow. She moved through rituals like a ghost wrapped in skin, hugging mourners with hands that shook, offering thanks while her soul unraveled thread by thread. At Daniel's memorial, she didn't stand beneath spotlights. She stood beneath the crushing weight of silence, the kind that presses down on the chest and steals the air. The voice that once lit arenas now flickered in broken prayers, barely audible above the grief. Her hands trembled as they lit candles. One for the man she loved more than life, another for the brother who had stood beside her in life's first songs, who had believed in her before the world did. How does one survive 2 funerals without letting the soul fall into the grave with them? How does a heart absorb that much absence without forgetting how to beat, how to hope, how to sing? She never pleaded for pity. She never collapsed before the public eye. She wore her grief like armor, heavy but necessary. But those closest to her whispered of nights where she sat alone in their Montreal home, wrapped in a silence so deep it hummed like a low, mournful note. They say she would clutch a photograph, René smiling, Daniel laughing, until her knuckles went white, eyes fixed on memories no longer living, lips moving in silent conversation with ghosts. Grief, they said, made her thinner, quieter, more ethereal, like the music inside her was playing through glass, beautiful but distant, untouchable. Because when love leaves twice in 2 days, the woman who remains is no longer the same. This wasn't just sorrow. It was soul rupture. It wasn't just loss. It was a sequence of goodbyes so cruelly timed even angels would have wept, would have looked away. And yet she remained standing, not to perform, not to prove strength, but to honor. To honor the brother who sang with her in the cold, the husband who believed when no one else did. Because that's who she is. A woman shaped by melody, but strengthened by mourning, refined by fire. And though the world remembers the songs, the gowns, the lights, it must also remember this. That behind the curtain stood a woman carrying 2 funerals in one heart, walking through darkness with nothing left but faith, and still somehow finding the strength to sing without breaking, to love without bitterness, to live without surrender. Long before the cameras ever captured Céline Dion's public heartbreak, before the world saw her draped in black and drowning in headlines, before the double blow of 2016, she had already faced a quieter sorrow, one that made no noise, no news, no ripple beyond the walls of a hospital room. It was a grief she carried alone years earlier, like a secret song stuck in her chest, written for a child who never got to grow up, never got to sing. Her name was Céline Dion. She was Céline's niece, 16 years old, fragile, radiant, born into a war she never chose. Cystic fibrosis, a cruel disease that slowly squeezes the lungs, steals breath, erases futures in silence. While the world fell in love with Céline's soaring voice, with her ballads of eternal love, she would often trade spotlight for bedside, leaving arenas filled with thousands to sit in hospital rooms lit by beeping monitors and fluorescent gloom. She didn't go there as a diva, as a celebrity aunt with gifts and cameras. She went as family, as love incarnate, holding Cérine's hand through the pain, whispering lullabies through the hum of oxygen machines, hoping her songs could somehow breathe life where medicine had failed, where hope was a thin thread. Céline adored music, adored Céline, not as a star, but as the aunt who sang to her, who made the sterile room feel like home. But love could not outpace the ticking clock. When Céline passed, the world didn't stop. There were no headlines, no breaking news alerts, no global outpouring. But Céline didn't need a press release. She didn't need sympathy from strangers. She had a piano. She had her grief. And she poured it into a song so tender it felt like a soul letting go in slow motion, note by note, breath by breath. Voler, the French word for fly, was not composed for albums or applause, not for charts or radio. It was Céline's final gift to Céline. A lullaby folded in pain, a prayer made of melody, a farewell letter sealed in music. She didn't scream the goodbye. She breathed it, softly, trembling, Fly, fly, little angel, far from this cruel world. Fly toward the light, the peace, the tenderness you've always deserved. Leave behind the pain, the machines, the fight. Go where the air is kind and the songs never end. The lyrics weren't crafted for the masses. They were whispered to the stars, to the heavens, to the soul of a girl who had suffered too much. And though Voller never topped charts, never became a global anthem, it remains one of the most sacred songs she's ever recorded. Not because it was famous, but because it was true, because it was love made audible. And even now, decades later, there's a lingering ache beneath every ballad she sings, a softness in her tone, a sigh between syllables, as if she's still singing to Corinne through the veil of time, still sending her love on wings of melody. Because not all grief is loud. Some of it lives in lullabies, in unlit candles, in silences too sacred to name. And for Céline Dion, Voller became more than a song. It became a promise etched in melody. That real love doesn't end when the body does. It simply finds wings and learns how to fly, soaring beyond pain, beyond loss, beyond death. For Céline Dion, motherhood was never a blessing that arrived quietly, gift-wrapped and effortless. It was a war fought in silence, a dream carved through blood, longing, and sleepless nights where even the stars offered no comfort, where hope was a fragile flame flickering against the wind of biology. Beneath the gowns that shimmered beneath stage lights, beneath the anthems that shook arenas and healed strangers across oceans, was a woman whispering prayers into the dark, begging the universe for one thing above all: to carry life, to hold a child who shared not just her blood, but her heartbeat, her song, her soul. After marrying René Angélil, the man who had risked everything to give her a voice, Céline wanted to give them both a new beginning, a family, a legacy beyond music. But nature showed no mercy. Pregnancy didn't come easily. While the world applauded her voice, it never saw the bruises on her belly from hormone injections, never heard the click of syringes at dawn, never felt the pain behind the forced smile she wore on red carpets as cameras flashed and fans screamed. Years of IVF, 2 surgeries, endless hormone treatments, all endured with the silence of a soldier at war, with the discipline of a performer who never missed a cue, led to the miracle that changed everything. The sound of René Charles's heartbeat in 2000, a tiny drumbeat of hope in a sonogram room. And when he was born in January 2001, it wasn't just a birth. It was the culmination of every unseen tear, every night she'd curled around emptiness and imagined holding a future in her arms, every prayer whispered into the void. But the dream was fragile, always fragile. In 2009, while the world thought she was busy recording, preparing for another tour, Céline suffered a miscarriage that shattered her privately. No headlines, no statements, just grief, thick and choking behind tour curtains and hotel walls, in rooms where no one could hear her cry. She stood on stages singing lullabies to millions while mourning the lullabies she never got to sing to that unborn child. Her smile a mask, her voice a shield. But Céline was never the kind to surrender to sorrow. She was a fighter, a believer, a woman who turned pain into purpose. At the age of 42, after another round of IVF and prayers that felt more like pleadings, more like bargains with God, she gave birth to twins Nelson and Eddie in 2010. 2 more miracles born from a body already pushed far beyond its limits. A body that had sung through pain, danced through exhaustion, endured for the sake of love. Joyful, yes, but also scarred. Her joy carried exhaustion. Her miracle carried warnings. Every smile hid fear that time or tragedy might one day steal her from the sons she had fought so hard to meet, that fate might demand yet another sacrifice. And then, as if fate was jealous of her triumph, as if it couldn't bear her happiness, René was taken from her in 2016. Overnight, she was no longer just a mother. She was a widow parenting 3 boys alone, trying to be both lullaby and anchor, both compass and shelter, when all she wanted was to lean on the man who was supposed to stand beside her, to share the weight, to grow old with her. The voice that once echoed through the world now sang only in the silence of night. Quiet lullabies in dimly lit rooms where the audience was small but the love immeasurable, where 3 small boys clung to her like she was their entire universe. No ovations followed, no curtain calls, no encores. Only the rustle of blankets, the weight of responsibility, and a strength few ever saw. A strength that came from love deeper than grief. Because fame came to her like wildfire. Sudden, consuming, unstoppable. But motherhood she had to battle for with every fiber of her soul. It was earned, not gifted. Fought for, not granted. It was a victory harder won than any Grammy, any sold-out show. And every time she looks into the eyes of René Charles, Nelson, and Eddie, she doesn't just see sons. She sees survival. She sees every needle, every loss, every note sung through pain. She sees the cost of love, the price of hope, the miracle of endurance. She sees why she never gave up, because they were the song her heart was waiting to sing. And in the hush between her softest lyrics, if the world listens closely enough, they'll hear it too. Not just a singer, not just a star, but a mother who bled through silence to build the family she now holds. Like a sacred melody that only she can hear. A melody that began in a drawer and now lives in 3 beating hearts. She once stood beneath the brightest lights the world could offer, singing with a voice so powerful, so celestial, so pure that entire arenas fell silent. Not out of obligation, but awe. Céline Dion wasn't merely a performer. She was a vessel of something sacred, a living hymn woven from heartbreak and grace, from poverty and perseverance. Every time she stepped on stage, she didn't just sing. She healed, confessed, remembered, forgave, loved. Her voice was thunder dressed in silk, lightning wrapped in velvet. And for decades, it seemed unbreakable, untouchable, eternal. But behind that unshakable voice, an invisible war had already begun. A war not against critics or competitors, but against her own body. As early as 2005, she noticed a subtle shift, a betrayal in the instrument she had trusted her entire life. Her vocal cords didn't respond the way they used to. Her breath tightened strangely, unpredictably. A quiet fear began to nest in her chest, a shadow she pushed away with discipline, with denial, with the refusal to believe that her gift could fail her. She would later describe that moment simply, with the understatement of a warrior. It freaked me out. What began as occasional discomfort turned into unbearable stiffness, then into spasms that twisted her muscles like wire. Her body, once so in sync with music, so obedient to her will, became a battlefield. The spasms grew violent, unpredictable, relentless. Her muscles locked like armor, rigid and unyielding. Her lungs resisted every breath, as if air itself had become an enemy. To outsiders, she blamed it on colds, on fatigue, on the strain of a demanding tour, anything but the truth. On stage, she dazzled, her smile radiant, her voice soaring. Backstage, she collapsed, her body trembling, her strength drained. In silence and secrecy, she fought through pain that had no name, no diagnosis, no cure, until desperation forced her into high doses of Valium, up to 90 milligrams a day, not for anxiety, not for escape, but just to function, to eat, to stand, to be the mother her children needed, the performer her fans expected. I could have died, she later admitted, not as a headline, not for sympathy, but as a hushed confession heavy with gratitude and disbelief, an acknowledgement of how close she had come to the edge. Still, she kept going. When her voice faltered mid-performance, when a note cracked or a phrase wavered, she turned the mic to the crowd, inviting them to sing. Not because she couldn't, but because she wouldn't let them see her struggle, wouldn't let illness steal her purpose. It wasn't pride. It was preservation. It was love. Then, in 2022, the silence broke. Céline was diagnosed with stiff person syndrome, SPS, a rare and devastating neurological disorder that affects fewer than 1 in a million, a condition that turns muscles into steel, steals mobility, clamps down on every freedom the body once offered so freely. It causes painful spasms, relentless stiffness, heightened sensitivity to sound and touch, triggers that can turn a gentle hug into agony, a loud noise into a seizure. In her documentary, I Am Céline Dion, released in 2024, the world finally saw what she had hidden for nearly 2 decades. Not a diva in decline, not a star fading, but a warrior in private collapse, a woman fighting a war no one knew she was waging. In one harrowing scene, she lies on a therapy table, her body writhing involuntarily, her hands clenching in pain as her therapist gently whispers, "Squeeze if it hurts." And she does, again and again, her fingers digging into the therapist's hand, her face crumpling as tears stream down, until the air itself feels too heavy to hold. There is no music playing in that room, no audience, no encore, no applause, only Céline and the ghost of everything she's fighting to hold on to. Her voice, her independence, her identity, her life. For someone whose identity was built upon the purity of her voice, upon the ability to command emotion with a single phrase, losing control of it is not a diagnosis. It's a disintegration. It's the unraveling of everything she is. And yet, even as her muscles betray her, her spirit refuses to. In a moment both fragile and fierce, she stands in a studio again, trembling but determined, her voice shaky but present. "If it cracks, then it cracks," she says softly, her eyes filled with tears and fire. "But if it works, it'll be the happiest day of my life." Those aren't just words. They are the heartbeat of a woman who refuses to let illness erase her purpose, who chooses hope over despair, fight over surrender. Today, Céline Dion may not command stadiums as she once did. She may not tour, may not release albums, may not stand beneath spotlights. But in her quiet resistance, in her daily battle against a body that fights her every move, she sings louder than ever. Not with her voice, but with her life. Every spasm endured, every breath reclaimed, every step toward recovery is her new performance. Less about pitch, more about perseverance. Less about perfection, more about presence. She has become not just the echo of her former glory, but the embodiment of resilience itself. A voice no longer soaring effortlessly, but one that chooses to rise over and over from the ruins, cracked but unbroken, fragile but fierce. As if the universe had not already tested the full capacity of one heart. Another goodbye loomed quietly in the shadows, one not marked by sudden illness or tabloid headlines, but by the slow, sacred unraveling of the only presence that had been with Céline Dion since before the music, before the arenas, before the sorrow, before the world knew her name. It wasn't her voice this time that betrayed her. It wasn't her health. It was her mother, her first home, her anchor, her beginning, Therese Dion, known to the world as Maman Dion, the woman who gave her life, love, and lyrics. While Céline fought to keep her identity intact amidst illness, widowhood, and relentless public expectation, life, in its cruel symmetry, reached in and took the one soul who had loved her before the world even knew her name, before the charts, before the fame, before the pain. In January 2020, at the age of 92, Therese Dion quietly left this world. There were no cries of sirens, no chaos, no dramatic collapse, just a soft, inevitable dimming, like the last flicker of a candle that had burned brightly for nearly a century, warming generations with its light. But for Céline, it wasn't just old age stealing a loved one. It was the quiet theft of her foundation, the silent vanishing of the woman who had once pressed lyrics into her small palms and whispered dreams into her ears while the rest of the world was still asleep. Therese was never just a mother. She was the first believer, the gentle hand that placed a microphone where a bottle once was, the heart that beat in rhythm with every early note Céline sang. She was the one who penned Céline's first song when she was just a child, who stood off stage with a smile steadier than any spotlight, who never needed front row seats to feel pride. Because her love wasn't measured in applause. It was measured in presence, in sacrifice, in the quiet certainty that her daughter was destined for greatness. Céline once said, with tears in her eyes and reverence in her voice, "If I could become half the woman my mother was, that would be my life's highest achievement." And now that woman, her mirror, her muse, her moral compass, was gone. Yet there were no dramatic cancellations, no public unraveling, no retreat into isolation. Céline did what her mother had raised her to do. She honored pain with poise, grief with grace. She stepped onto a stage dressed in black, her heart splintered but her spine straight, and sang. Not because the grief had passed, not because she had healed, but because music was the only language she had ever known that could hold both mourning and memory at once, that could carry love beyond death. No one saw her collapse behind closed doors. No one heard her whisper, "Mama!" into the silence of a hotel room where applause no longer echoed, where the bed was too big and the night too quiet. But if you listened, truly listened, with the ear of the heart, you could hear it in every trembling note that followed, in every breath that caught, in every silence that spoke. That night, and every night since, she didn't just sing to the crowd. She sang to the void, to the loss, to the spirit of a mother now watching from somewhere beyond sound, beyond sight, beyond time. This wasn't a loss the world would quantify with statistics or headlines. This was the kind that quietly rewrites your breath, that turns every melody into a memorial, that shifts the center of your being without making a sound. The world may have lost a cherished cultural figure, a matriarch of music, but Céline Dion lost her final sanctuary, her unshakable truth, her last unconditional embrace. The woman who had loved her before she was Céline Dion, when she was just Tiba, the baby in the drawer. And still she sang. Not to move on, not to forget, but to carry forward. Not because the pain had dulled, but because her mother had given her a gift nothing, not even death, could take away. The strength to sing through sorrow and the grace to turn every goodbye into a legacy. Because some losses don't need headlines. They live in lullabies. They echo in the silence between verses. And they find new life in every note sung with love. Especially when that love began with a mother who believed before anyone else ever did. Who saw a star in a child and nurtured it with her whole heart. Today, Céline Dion no longer lives under the blinding lights of world tours or the thunderous applause of sold-out arenas, but within a quiet sanctuary in Las Vegas, Nevada, where her presence, though physically distant from the stage, remains eternally etched in the hearts of millions. After conquering global charts, collecting Grammy Awards by the armful, and redefining the meaning of vocal mastery with a range and emotional depth unmatched in her generation, Céline now resides not in extravagance, but in a refined solitude that balances serenity with strength, healing with purpose. Her $4.5 million estate, nestled in the Nevada desert, no longer echoes with the bustle of rehearsals, the chatter of stylists, or the excitement of celebrity galas, but with the quieter rhythms of healing, motherhood, and reflection. The sound of children's footsteps, the hum of a home studio, the soft murmur of prayer. With her once sprawling real estate empire, including the legendary $72 million Bahamian-inspired estate in Florida, sold to fund privacy and care, and her $25.5 million Quebec chateau, now largely entrusted to family or long-term planning, Céline's current focus has shifted inward, away from the world's gaze, toward the things that cannot be bought. As of her last public financial disclosures, her net worth remains a staggering $800 million, accumulated through decades of relentless artistry, entrepreneurial ventures, and a legacy that spans perfume lines that defined elegance, platinum albums that soundtrack generations, and historic Las Vegas residencies that turned entertainment into communion. But her fortune now serves less as a trophy and more as a protective circle around the things that truly matter. Her health, her family, and the fragile gift of time. The time to heal, to mother, to simply be. Since revealing her diagnosis in December 2022 with stiff person syndrome, a rare, progressive, and debilitating neurological disorder that causes painful spasms, muscle stiffness, and motor impairment. Often triggered by stress, noise, or touch, Céline has withdrawn almost entirely from public appearances. Her physical condition has forced her to cancel all remaining tour dates, postpone indefinitely her long-awaited return to Las Vegas, and step back from the spotlight that once defined her. But this retreat is not a resignation. It is a recalibration, a conscious choice to prioritize survival over spectacle, life over legacy. She continues intensive treatment with a team of therapists, nutritionists, and specialists focusing on mobility, speech, and pain management. Therapies that are grueling, incremental, hopeful. Her meals are now carefully curated for anti-inflammatory benefits. Fresh, light, nourishing. Her body is supported by gentle physiotherapy, massage, and deep rest, the kind of rest she was never allowed in her performing years. And though her once iconic silhouette has visibly changed, her frame thinner, her features more gaunt, her movements slower, her eyes still carry the unmistakable fire of a woman who has never surrendered easily, who meets each day with courage. She has not yet publicly confirmed the existence of a will, but sources close to the family suggest that estate planning is quietly underway. An act not of fear, not of defeat, but of maternal clarity, of love that looks ahead. At the heart of everything she fights for are her sons. René Charles, now 23, a budding rapper and producer who performs under the name René Angélil, respectfully forging his own voice in the shadows of her colossal legacy, carrying forward the family's musical bloodline. And twins Nelson and Eddie, now 14, sheltered from public scrutiny, growing up with a balance of quiet anonymity and deep maternal love, learning resilience from the strongest woman they know. Céline, despite her declining health, remains the steady core of their lives, still supervising their education with the same discipline she once applied to vocal warm-ups, guiding their emotional development with the wisdom of loss, encouraging their artistic exposure with the passion of a woman who knows the power of a dream. While she no longer performs for the world, Céline has not let go of her connection to the craft that saved her, that defined her, that healed her. She reportedly spends time in her home studio, not to record albums, not to chase charts, but to stay close to the voice that defined her life, to keep it alive within her. She hums lullabies to her children in the mornings, sings softly as the sun rises over the desert, and occasionally meets with vocal coaches to maintain tone and breath, even if only for herself, even if only in whispers. Her team has hinted at a possible documentary beyond I Am, Céline Dion, one that may chronicle her life's later chapters, not as a spectacle, not for sympathy, but as a tribute to endurance, loss, and the relentless pursuit of healing, a final gift to the fans who have walked with her through every storm. Public appearances are now rare and brief, captured mostly by paparazzi as she is helped into a vehicle wrapped in scarves and oversized sunglasses, her steps careful, her posture proud. But each sighting reminds fans not of frailty, but of unimaginable strength, of a woman who has faced every kind of loss and still chooses to stand. Because behind those dark glasses is a woman still grieving her husband, her brother, her mother, still waking each day with a body that resists her spirit, yet choosing over and over again to love, to mother, to endure, to hope. Céline Dion's story has shifted from one of vocal triumph to one of human courage, from the stage to the sanctuary, from the spotlight to the shadow. The stage may be silent, but in the quiet rooms of her home, surrounded by children, memories, and the sacred stillness of survival, she sings a different kind of song now, one of resilience, of dignity, and of a love for life that not even illness can mute. Her voice may no longer shake stadiums, but it continues to stir hearts in the most intimate of ways through the strength of a woman still standing, still fighting, still loving, even as the world turns quietly without her on stage. Behind the heavy silence of her private life, far from the camera flashes and roaring applause that once defined her existence, lies a truth too raw for headlines, too sacred for speculation. Céline Dion, the woman who once carried nations on the wings of her voice, who made millions believe in love through song, now often finds herself unable to rise from her bed, brought to her knees not in dazzling performances, but in unrelenting, invisible agony that strikes without warning, without mercy. Her sons, René Charles, Eddie, and Nelson, have borne witness to a version of their mother the world never sees. Frail, trembling, fighting through the violent spasms of stiff person syndrome with a quiet defiance that defies human limits, that would break most but only bends her. They have sat beside her in the dark, hands clasped tightly around hers, whispering strength into the spaces where once she sang them lullabies, where once her voice was their safety. They have cried, not because she asked for pity, she never does, never would, but because they are watching the strongest soul they know wage a war with her own body, a war with no victory parade, no medal, no end in sight. And still she does not yield. They've begged her to rest, to let go, to stop pushing so hard, to allow herself the mercy she gives so freely to others. But she never listened. Not because she ignored their pain, not because she didn't hear their pleas, but because she remembered what it meant to be their anchor, their lighthouse in a sea of loss, their mother when the world had taken everything else. She remembered the drawer, the hunger, the sacrifices, the love that built their family. And now, as her body weakens, as the spasms come more frequently, as the pain deepens, it is they who return the light, offering her the same devotion she once gave them without question, without hesitation, without end. Beyond the agony and the illness, beyond the limits imposed by fate, Céline remains what she has always been. The foundation of a family stitched together through grief and grace, through loss and love. And yet, despite everything she endures, despite the widowhood, the double funeral, the miscarriage, the diagnosis, the silence, she remains one of the most successful women in music history, a titan whose influence spans generations. Her estimated net worth, over $800 million, isn't just a reflection of record-breaking tours, diamond-selling albums, or her revolutionary Las Vegas residency that redefined modern performance and turned a theater into a church. It is a mirror of decades of relentless discipline, of nights without sleep, of memories sung into being with nothing but breath and belief, of a work ethic forged in poverty and tempered by love. But her true wealth isn't in the numbers. It's in her legacy. Her voice, once called a force of nature, became the hymn of love and heartbreak for generations, a soundtrack to first dances and final goodbyes. It turned lyrics into lifelines, turning everyday verses into sacred scripture for the brokenhearted and the hopeful alike, for the lover and the loner, for the dreamer and the defeated. And though illness may have quieted her stage, it could never silence her impact. Her songs still play in delivery rooms and funeral chapels, in wedding halls and hospital rooms, in quiet cars at midnight and loud parties at dawn. They still bring peace to people who have never even seen her face, who only know her through the radio, through a memory, through a moment when her voice said exactly what their heart needed to hear. Céline has given more than music. She has given herself through her advocacy for children's hospitals, where she visited sick kids incognito, singing softly at bedsides, through her tireless support for cystic fibrosis research in memory of her beloved niece Corinne, funding breakthroughs with quiet generosity, and through countless quiet acts of kindness the world never heard about, scholarships, donations, letters of encouragement. She has amplified causes that needed more than money. They needed a voice strong enough to be heard in suffering, a heart big enough to hold the pain of strangers. And what makes Céline Dion endure, not only as an artist but as a woman, as a mother, as a human, is how she did it all with unshakable humility, without ego, without scandal, without ever turning her back on her roots. She soared higher than most could dream, but her feet always touched home. Charlemagne, Quebec, the drawer, the hunger, the love. When tragedy tried to silence her, from the loss of her husband René, her brother Daniel, her mother Therese, to her private health battles that nearly took her life, she didn't disappear into bitterness, into isolation, into despair. She stood even when it hurt, even when standing meant shaking under the weight of everything she'd lost, everything she was losing. In recent appearances, rare, fleeting, powerful, she no longer tries to hide her condition. Yes, she looks thinner. Yes, she walks slower with assistance. Yes, her hands tremble, but her eyes still shine with the same fire, the same faith, the same love. And when she tells the world, in a voice soft but steady, "If I can't run, I'll walk. If I can't walk, I'll crawl. But I won't stop," it is not a performance. It is not a soundbite. It is a gospel for every human being struggling to hold on. A sermon from a woman who has lived it, who is living it, who refuses to let pain be the final note. She is no longer chasing applause. She has long outgrown it, transcended it. Her voice may crack, her hands may tremble, her body may fail, but her silence roars louder than fame ever could. Because her songs still fill the air, still wrap around broken hearts, still remind the world that love endures. She doesn't need to sing them anymore. They've become part of the world's bloodstream, flowing through weddings and wakes, through joy and grief, through life. And in this noisy world where volume often replaces meaning, where trends come and go, where fame is fleeting, Céline teaches us about the power of stillness, of authenticity, of grace under pressure. In a music industry obsessed with reinvention, with image, with controversy, she remains eternal. Not because she chased trends, but because she stayed true to herself, to her voice, to her heart. Her story is not about vocal range, though hers was legendary. It's not about awards, though she won them all. It's about courage, about singing when your voice breaks, about mothering when your heart is shattered, about loving when the world gives you every reason to shut down, to close off, to disappear. It is the story of a woman who held a microphone in one hand and her children, her pain, her grief, her faith in the other, and never let go. As we reflect on Céline Dion's journey, her triumphs that moved mountains, her tragedies that would have crushed lesser souls, her transformation from a girl in a drawer to a legend in lace, we must remember that greatness is not measured by sold-out stadiums, by chart positions, by net worth. It is measured by the grace you carry when no one is watching, by the love you give when you have nothing left, by the light you refuse to let go out. And now we ask you, those who found comfort in her melodies, who have walked through storms with her voice in your ears, who have loved and lost and loved again because she showed you it was possible. What does Céline Dion mean to you? What song of hers wrapped around your soul in your darkest hour or lifted you higher in your brightest joy? Was it because you loved me that got you through a breakup? My Heart Will Go On that played at your wedding? It's all coming back to me now. That reminded you of a love that never really left? Leave us a comment below. Share your memory, your story, your truth, your heart. Because your voice, your experience, your love are part of the chorus that keeps her music alive, even when she can no longer sing it herself. Her legacy is not just in the records, it's in you. It's in us. It's in the way we love, the way we endure, the way we refuse to let the music die.